What's today, the 8th? I'm really sorry.
You're upright, that's a plus.
That is a plus. I'd like to call to order a meeting of the Board of Selectmen for the town of North Andover for Tuesday, March 8th, 2016. We will begin with Pledge of Allegiance. Why not? Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we're aware, tonight the agenda is strictly candidates' interviews for the police chief. I'm sorry, I keep hitting something. We started a little late, our apologies, but I'm going to hand it to Town Manager Mailer to have a little opening statement initially.
So just one announcement that really would be under communication, even if we don't have that. As of 5:45 this evening, Billy McCarthy, who you selected as fire chief, has executed a contract with the town. It's in your packets this evening. I apologize, been eating too much candy. You certainly have an opportunity to review that contract, but he and I have executed an agreement. He's also submitted a letter indicating that he'll be relinquishing his civil service status, which was a requirement of the motion you made at the time you've appointed him. So that's been complete. It's great news. He will be here on the 21st to be formally sworn in, which was an exciting day. So Laurie has a copy of the agreement, and again, it's not a public agreement until executed, but it gives you the opportunity to review it, or review it and sign it however you'd like. That was a newer development later in the day-to-day, but that's all happened, so it's really great news. From a process perspective, switching to the police chief process, and Sergeant Crevier, I guess, can hear me step through this process. I think it's important to identify what's gotten us here today, which is that a requirement under the town charter that I conduct an assessment center anytime we were hiring a police or fire chief. This is the same process, quite frankly, that took place through the fire chief selection, which took place a couple of weeks ago. So we've conducted that assessment center, a company called Municipal Resources, who has extensive experience in conducting assessment centers, did so for both the police chief and the fire chief. As a function of that, the board then gets to choose, quite frankly, from member to member, how they want to use the information in the assessment center or any other information that they may choose to include in a decision process. Tonight's an interview phase, something that the Board of Selectmen wanted as part of the process. We've prepared a set of questions based upon Mr. Santilli and I, based upon our experience in dealing with police chiefs, that we think would be appropriate for you to ask. You decide the process as it relates from here on, and then as individuals, quite frankly, you decide what criteria you'd like to use in terms of making a decision relative to selection. So there's nothing in the charter that defines that. This becomes individual decisions of board members as we proceed. So the purpose of tonight is to ask each of the candidates to come here. As the board is aware through random selection, which is sort of an interesting process in our office as we put names in a hat and pull them out. Sergeant Crevier is here. It works. Some method has to work. So the candidates you'll see in the order that you'll see here are based not on alphabetical order or chronological age or anything else. It's simply based upon Mr. Santilli and I throwing a group of names in a box, I think it was, and pulling them out in order. We didn't have a hat. No. Yeah, you and I both. So with that, at the conclusion of the interview phase, again, it's up to the board to decide what next steps you would take, whether that's selection this evening or additional information that you may require.
Okay. So our first candidate this evening is Sergeant Daniel Crevier. Good, how are you this evening? During the fire chief's interviews, I inadvertently did not allow opening statements. This evening, I am not going to forget that. So we're going to begin with an opening statement.
Thank you very much for letting me be here. Members of the town and the Board of Selectmen as well. I'm truly I'm honored and humbled by it. As you know, I've been a police officer here for 22 years. Well, it'll be 22 years in 2 weeks, ironically. I grew up in this town. I have a lot of vested interest in this town, friends, family. As a police officer, I can't imagine any other job that you get to have such a diverse task list. You can go from a high-stress situation to, talking to one of our elders that mistakenly dialed 911. As far as me, I'm really about the leadership and taking our police department to the next level. I've had a lot of experience with NEMLIC and the regional response team, as well as action and reconstruction. I've taken a lot of interest in that. I currently lead the action and reconstruction unit with our police department, which I have 2 detectives that we all work very, very well together. I'm currently assigned as a sergeant on the split shift, which is to say that after 8 to 4 on my shift, I run the show, and I've been by myself as a sergeant for the last almost a year due to Sergeant Crane retiring last year. With that, it ends with me. Years ago we used to have lieutenants run every shift, and through attrition, sergeants have pretty much filled that gap. So we're doing what lieutenants used to do in the past, just under a different title. I love what I do, and I wouldn't trade it for anything, and especially here in North Andover.
Thank you. I think I'll begin with the first question. Are we good with that, or do we want to have a discussion how the questions will go?
Certainly, I think we can go around the room. I'd like to, question 2 and 3, I'd like to actually ask them as a single question, if I could. The 2 on the list.
Okay. Dick, I'm Malcolm Pine. All right, we can start with the first one, and I like that. So, Sergeant, what are your expectations for the police department? What do you hope to achieve as police chief, both in the short term, in the 1 to 2 year, as well as the long range, 3 to 5 years?
There's numerous things I'd love to do. To save time, I sent you all that package yesterday just to kind of reinforce my goals. Within the short term, really get a feel for what these officers want to do. We have a tremendous group of police officers. A lot of times, some of their talents are wasted. They don't really get into the things that they really want to get into due to funds or just lack of training. Ideally, I'd like to do that, as well as meeting with the community. We have a great crime watch program, but that's really at the level function with our detectives. They are the bread and butter behind that. I'd like to get more officers involved in the community programs, and more so identify a wider range of people within the town, get some more input from what they want to see from their police department. I think that's imperative when you're forming a partnership with the community. I know that Chief Gallagher and the detectives have done a great job with that. I'd like to keep going with it. As far as long term, I know that we have issues with the heroin crisis. That is something that I really have, a strong willingness to get involved in. The city of Gloucester started that Angel program a few years ago, and since then they've had 400 people in the door requesting help. And since then, there have been 40 other departments across the country, well, as far as Illinois and Florida, that have utilized that program. And for those that don't know, that program really is about having those with drug dependencies come in and seek help. I'd like to see us get more involved in that. The city of Norwood has a program where they give out cards with treatment centers to anybody that is looking for help. And along those lines, that will reduce, or hopefully reduce, our crimes. I mean, our car breaks, our larcenies, our shopliftings, a lot of those are based on drug dependence problems. So that is really where I'm going. And especially now, too, our department is very inexperienced. We have a very young group of officers that have come into to the department, and I think there's 12 with less than 3 years' experience. We need to reach those officers and get them more specialized training and start getting them involved in the process of gaining experience here in the town. That is going to be a big transition. As you know, we have a lot of experienced officers that have retired and will retire. So long-term, ultimately, and there's a list of them that I could talk all night about, but generally that's where I would go.
Okay, thank you. Selectman Valencourt?
So, I'm going to take two questions and kind of combine them as one, so it'll
Okay.
be more or less like a three-part question.
Okay.
I think you'll be fine with it. So, the department right now has its strengths, and it has its areas where it needs improvements. I'd like you to talk a little bit about both of those and the attributes that you bring or will bring as chief to, one, maintain those strengths, and two, address those weaknesses. Or, let me say areas for improvements. I don't want to say weaknesses.
Yeah.
Areas for improvements.
Right now, I think our areas of strength are community programs with our detectives right now, as I said before. That's also our weakness. We don't have enough guys involved or enough members of the department involved in that. As far as our strengths, we have some great officers that do a lot of training, and I'd like to see them do more with that and take it to the community. I know as far as school resource officers go, we have 2 school resource officers working. Our school resource officer in the high school, I'd like to see him develop some type of drug awareness program. I mean, we used to do DARE a long time ago here in the department. We don't do that anymore. Maybe establish something with this high school to develop some type of drug awareness program or some life skills program that we can kind of relate to them. As far as our shortcomings, I guess, off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything shortcoming. We should be more involved in the community. I think our officers are more on the reactionary and the traditional side of policing, and we've gone backwards a little bit, especially in light of everything that's happened in the last few years with Baltimore and Ferguson. It's imperative that we get to the public and really start communicating with the public a little bit better than what we're doing now.
So the third part of that question would be attributes that you bring to the chief's role to both maintain the strengths and address those areas for improvements. So that's kind of like part 3.
Me personally, I'm a people person. I mean, I want to get out and talk with everybody. It's very difficult now. I've been on the split shift. I work a few nights a week, and it's very difficult for me to get out in the community. I know as the police chief that's my, the door's open. Anybody wants to come in, we'll talk. I think that's one of my, it's actually kind of a shortcoming for me, because at times, even with our own guys, I speak the truth. I mean, I just come right out with it, and I don't really hold back. I want people to be better at what they do. I myself, I don't really like to be average. I want to be better than average, and I know that in my position as a chief, I could bring that. And with me, empowering these officers, I'd get them all hopefully up to a standard that is more liking to this community.
Thank you.
What have you done in the past 1 to 3 years to prepare yourself to be chief of North Andover?
Well, as a sergeant, I've done a lot. The police department, we're court mandated to have a video surveillance system in our interview room. The chief mentioned that it was going to be about $7,000. I was able to install it myself and have it operational for about $3,000. So I'm big on efficiency. If there's an easier way to do something, let's do it. Cost effectiveness, that's also a big tool in my toolbox. It has to be cost effective. Throughout the station, I've installed TVs. We were watching station monitors at 20 inches. And we know how difficult that gets after 40. So I installed a bunch of TVs throughout the station. Everything that I've done in that station has been not so much as the image of being the chief. I mean, I thought he'd stay longer, to be quite honest with you, but my goal was to just run that department more efficient. I wanted to get more out of what we had, as well as, grooming some of the new officers to their positions, and being a mentor to some of the new officers, and then it kind of just showed up that the chief's position would be open, and I always wanted to be the chief, and you know that, Mr. Stewart, from my interview. That was the first thing I said to you, was that I wanted to be chief, so.
They don't remember that.
No, I know. I think you asked me in our interview originally, where do you see yourself? And my answer was the chief of police, so.
Why?
Why?
Why do you want to be chief of police?
Because even now, I think I have so much more energy and enthusiasm for police work. Why not use it at the highest capacity? To be the guy that steers the ship instead of the one that paddles. And that's, for me, I always knew that I was a leader. My years as a union rep, some people would say that's good and some people say that's bad, but, Mr. Santilli and I can attest that we had some rough spots, and it was a learning experience for me, and working so close with the former chief and the chief now, I see no better place for me than being the chief, and I think I would do a very good job at it. Did that answer your question?
No, you did.
Okay.
I just figured, I just jumped in. It seemed like it was
Oh, okay.
good. You had said you always wanted to be chief. I was not around when Don got to ask that question. You told him that. I probably was, actually. So, no, my question was farther down.
That was one of the questions.
On the back, why you want to be police chief? No, because I wasn't the last one to turn in my questions. That's why. My question, I guess, if to jump to one, I don't know which one was yours. I had written down that for me, the promotional process we intentionally kept to be internal, and I know that we have 3 really qualified people, 2 following that are going to come and sit before us this evening, and that means the next chief, by keeping it internal, is going to oversee a department where 2 of the people who competed for that position and came and sat before this board were beat out by that new chief. What, if anything, will you do to utilize the skills of the 2 other gentlemen who are seeking to be chief? And more importantly, what will you do to build bridges and mend any fences with people in the department that may have liked to have seen another person become chief?
I can personally say that I can work with anybody. Lieutenant Folds and Lieutenant Gray are both great police officers and terrific commanders. They're good at what they do. I think from a chief's standpoint and professional standpoint, regardless of our personal opinions of each other, our goal is to function as a unit for the best interests of the town and for the department. All that stuff can be put aside if there's any. Lieutenant Folds, he was a mentor to me. Him and I have done so many different things. I remember the day he was appointed as sergeant. We were at a class for 2 weeks for crime prevention, and I was genuinely happy for him. He comes from a good line of. His father was a detective who actually ultimately did my background investigation. So yeah, I think they, as well as the other sergeants that are in there, we have some good people, and we all work together pretty well. Some things have bygones be bygones, and at the end of the day, I know that my ability to work with anybody is paramount. I can deal with anybody, and with those 2, I'd be crazy not to utilize their experience and their knowledge to the benefit of the police department.
What would you say is a weakness of yours as a leader and supervisor, and what would you do as chief to address that trait? It's a tough one, we know.
I really,
You need to sit still. Sorry, a little
It's okay.
tension there, though, didn't
It's
it?
okay. No, as long as it wasn't me. To answer that question, you know, I've thought about that a lot, and I mean, we all have some weaknesses. I think my biggest weakness is my expectation of people. You know, I deal with such a diverse group of people, on the job and off the job. And even on the job, I do have expectations. We have new officers coming in, and I have to hold myself back sometimes to understand that they don't have 10 years' experience to do what they do. And, you know, it's about really, you know, I should say our experienced officers, I can say no problem, like this is how things are done. And with our new officers, I don't know that I explain it as well as I should to some of the things that they should understand. With that being said, going into the chief's role, I have to really expect that not everybody knows it. And what I've learned as a sergeant over the last few years is that every person has a different learning curve, and that coming into the job, you know, the expectations I might have of one are not the same that I have of another. And that's one thing that I've been really working at is treating each person and each officer more individual than as a group, and I've become better at it. And as a chief, I know that will be still on the top of my list of things that I have to work on. But dealing with the public and everything, I certainly have a good grasp of what's going on with the public and how to read character and personalities. But police officers, I expect that they know things, and sometimes they don't. And that's probably one of my weaknesses that I will be working on.
Is that the last one? Okay, sure. The police department has been accredited for a number of years. Do you anticipate continuing with accreditation? And so how do you view accreditation and being beneficial to the department? How do you view accreditation as being beneficial to the town or the community? If you need me to read it again,
No,
there's a lot there.
I understand. Accreditation, we would be, it would be poor judgment if we didn't continue with that process. Accreditation is, you know, it puts you on a higher level than other departments. I mean, when I talk about it with members of the NEMLIC and, you know, the regional groups that we have meetings, and, you know, being accredited is, you're a step above everybody else. As far as the town's perspective, I mean, it reduces liability, holds a higher standard to our officers. It gives them clear guidelines and clear directives. We have a policy virtually for everything. And yeah, I mean, it's something that I would certainly have our Sergeant Solois, as a matter of fact, maintain that as long as possible. And you know, from a union, when we were first accredited, I mean, myself and Chief Gallagher were actually the union reps at the time, and we had a lot to do with the policies and everything that got through to that, and it was very important to us at that time, and still is.
Sergeant Crevier, I'd like to thank you for your dedicated...
Madam Chair, can we continue with, so after we submitted questions, I mean, especially after having the chance to read through what were two documents that I received from different applicants, I had other follow-up questions that I was hoping to ask, but in general of all the applicants.
Well, we can have an open discussion about that, I suppose, although we have to be relatively consistent. It has to be consistent.
It has to be consistent.
Yep. Yep. But I mean, I have never done this before.
Same questions for all.
Oh, I mean, absolutely.
How many do you have?
So, I mean, for me, because we're in a unique position because these gentlemen have had the chance to see their assessment scores.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you can talk about, at least in general, that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, other than speaking to the town manager, I don't know anything else about the assessment process. Was there anything for you that you wish you had?
Again, now I'm a little confused. What do you mean by that? We've been provided with the assessment scores for the candidates.
Weren't the candidates also provided their scores?
But I may have misunderstood you. You implied that You hadn't seen them, or at least that was the...
No, I know, but I don't know what I just said, but, so you've seen
I've seen my
scores.
scores, yes.
Was there a section of that test that you wanted to speak more about that maybe can't be communicated?
So
via
I'm
this
going
number?
to, if I can talk about this a little bit, and this is a board decision. So I'm taking the position that the assessment center results are protected under the open meeting law, under the Public Information Act. I would say that if the board decides to get into the details of the specific aspects of the test, I would have a different opinion. So the board has to decide whether or not it feels like delving into the specific aspects of the exam is something that you're interested in doing. That's your choice. I'm not directing you on that. But if you decide to get into the specifics as opposed to just referencing the assessment center or referencing, say, broad results, that'd be one thing. If you choose to have a more specific discussion about aspects of the result, then I would advise you that in that case, under the new open meeting law, it would be a requirement to attach the complete assessment center results of all candidates to the minutes of this meeting. That's a choice you have to make.
So, if the question were reframed, could you speak more about just a part of the assessment or anything that you'd like to alert us to?
Again, I don't want to direct you on. I just want to make you aware of it. Ultimately, the board, as the custodian of the assessment center results, can always release the results. That's your choice, because there is no document that technically is forever protected. I'm just advising you if you have. You may want to decide whether or not you want to release the results of the assessment center, and if there's the decision that you don't want to release them, then be cautious about delving into specific aspects of those scores, because in that case I would indicate to you or advise you that it would in fact then need to be released.
Would it have, just to, again, to be clear on open meeting law, and should they have been attached to the agenda? As a document?
Should they have been attached to the agenda?
Yeah, should have been part of the...
No, we start at the position that the assessment center itself...
The minutes, but not the agenda.
That maybe neither. We're starting at the position that the assessment center is part of the selection process and are not subject to the public records law. You determine if they will be through one of two actions. Either a voted decision by the board that you want them released, which is fine, or by your actions in terms of the form that the discussion takes. If you get into details like there were 12, and these are, by the way, fictional, there were 12 categories on the third line, candidate X scored this, and can you talk to me about that? Or some level of detail beyond a broad reference, then I would indicate to you that when you receive the minutes from us to approve for this meeting, we would be attaching the assessment center results under my interpretation of the new version of the open meeting law. So that's on the board to decide.
I mean, I feel like I know ideally we didn't, soon-to-be Chief McCarthy did not get to see his scores, and I understand Graham Rowe didn't get to see his scores, but because these three did, prior to our meeting, they didn't
I think
get to
you're
see
confusing
scores,
two
right?
different items. Both Graham Rowe and Deputy McCarthy have seen their scores.
But prior to our conversation, right? with them?
But I'm not sure what the difference makes. It doesn't change the open meeting law requirements. It doesn't. I just want to be clear. It doesn't change the open meeting law.
I'm just curious now because we have this opportunity as interviewees where the gentlemen who are interviewing for this position have had the chance to see these results. They can provide some context.
See their results.
I'm not asking Sergeant Crevier about anybody else's.
But this is a
results,
public
though.
meeting, so I want the public to be clear. The individual candidates have seen their respective results.
Okay.
The words are really important to me. They've had the opportunity to see their individual respective results. But the difference between the results, sorry to get hung up in words.
So I'm not asking Sergeant Crevier to speak to either of the other two candidates' results, though. I just am curious, because he's had the chance now to see his results, if there's anything in general he'd like to speak about, either that any type of impressions he was left with from that process, if there was anything that he would do differently, just to talk about that process more, whereas before we've not had that option, or at least I don't think that we had that option last time.
Yep. I don't want to imply I'm driving the process. I just want to set the framework, and then you folks can decide how you want to use that.
The question is general about the process. about the assessment center and the general impressions of the, that's what it sounds like as you.
And if there were any things that stand out to you, either that as strengths or any weaknesses that you'd like to identify based on that, because for me, I mean, they're numbers, and all I have from the numbers is now you don't have the other two
general
candidate
enough,
scores,
right?
but I just know. I mean, I can look at the three of you and see how you compared in different categories. I'm just curious about what your experience was like with that assessment center, and if there were things that you'd like to talk about as far as that experience goes, or again.
Absolutely, I understand. Yeah, as far as the assessment, I had taken the lieutenant's assessment back in September, and I did very well on it. I knew what to expect, and I put more focus on, the thing with these assessments is, if you don't say it, in theory, you don't know it, and that's how you're scored based on. In this particular assessment, yeah, there are two categories that I wish that I had done better. In fact, I wish I had done better on the whole thing. But the two categories, I mean, if I could say them, is that appropriate or not? Well, I'll just, for your purposes, the two bottom categories, both that I have specific knowledge with, written assignments or anything. I've been doing that for 15 years as a union president or a union rep, or 11 out of the 15 years. Yeah, there were certain things that I wish I had done better on, and I went in more assumptive to that assessment, and it certainly took away. I don't believe it gauged my proper ability in those two categories, especially. But it is a fair process, and I do respect that. And at the end of the day, I know that I'm much better than what was on that. If that answers your question.
They're numbers to me, and I feel
Yeah.
like if
Well, I mean,
you have-
generally speaking, I guess if I could throw it out a little bit, is assessments are based on 1 to 9, with 5 as the middle range, and you're scored based on high, above the 5 and below the 5. But and like I said, there are two specific categories that I wish I had done much better on, and my experience certainly didn't show the true picture of my knowledge in those fields or those subjects.
I hope that this was an organic opportunity to interview.
Can I ask another question? About, you brought up something for me tonight when you mentioned the chief of the fire department, the incoming chief, signing the contract. I would like to ensure that whoever we hire as the police chief, this is very specific language in the contract, and I know you've had a chance to review it. Are you ready to execute that contract?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sergeant Crevier.
Thank you.
And my closing statement as well.
It's up to you.
Yeah, why don't we have a closing statement before we end this?
Okay. First, again, I appreciate your letting me be here. It is an honor, and I look back on my career, and I somewhat got a late start into the promotional process, and much of that was union relationships and other things that had kind of put me behind the 8 ball, I should say, until I realized really what it was all about. And again, there were things I wish I had done differently, but as I guess matured on the job and understood the job more, I've always had a love for this town, and I've always been up for a challenge, and I've always, it's almost, I'm anxious to do something all the time, to, whether it's, negotiating a contract or whether it's just talking to people. It's very in my nature, and I know that I would do a fantastic job as a chief, and I'm confident. I have the credibility with my coworkers and my subordinates, I should say, and these officers are great officers, and we have a great little relationship in that department where there's 40 men and women, and it's everybody knows everything, and it's almost like, you know, as their leader, they just want somebody to lead them, and I know that I would do well at that.
Thank you, Sergeant Crevier, for your time, effort, and energy this evening.
Thank you.
And for your service to the town
Thank
of
you.
North Andover.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, we are.
It was like that last night, too, the background, the feedback.
Yep, I do. Good evening. Our second candidate this evening is Lieutenant Charles Gray. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We are beginning with opening statements from the candidates.
My opening statement. I'm excited, grateful, and thankful to be here. 5 years ago, I sat in the same position, vying for the same job. After the last 5 years and learning what I've learned, doing the job functions that I've done, I can safely say that 5 years ago, I wasn't ready. This time, I'm ready. Thank you.
I'm going to start your interview with the first question. What are your expectations for the police department, and what do you hope to achieve as police chief in both the short term, 1 to 2 years, as well as the longer term, 3 to 5 years?
Well, as I outlined in the booklet you all got, right now it's going to be a transition period, and short-term goals are, as I outlined, re-emphasizing community policing. Technology is going to be advancing. We have to stay on top of that. And also, the command staff is going to be changing. We want to make sure that we start building a solid foundation right away. Long-term down the road, the possibilities are limitless. There's so much out there as far as what other departments doing with the technology wave, with community policing. There's just so much potential. And right now, like I put in here, I do have a strategic plan. I would say that's probably a 3 to 5 year plan at the most. After that would have to be another plan in place to, again, keep moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Lieutenant Gray, I have the next one. Thank you for coming tonight and stepping forward. So the department has some very strong attributes and strengths, and it also has some areas for improvements. Can you talk about those areas of strengths and those areas of improvements and the attributes that you bring to the job to handle those?
One of the strengths we see, that I see right now, is that we've had a period over the last 5 years where we've changed over to a younger officer. We have people coming on the job that have less than 5 years on. And what happened was the officers that transitioned out had 25 to 30 years. These newer officers, they're millennials. They're unbelievably savvy with equipment, technology. They're excited to be here. They're excited to do the job. That's definitely one of our strengths. One of our weaknesses, I would say, is the brand, especially given the way things are in this country. The branding. You know, police officers don't have the same. For example, I got on in 2001 right after 9/11, and it was, you'd walk in and people were happy to see you. They spoke to you kindly, thanked you for being a police officer. Now I think the brand is that we're getting a lot of bad publicity, and we have to change that. So that's one of the weaknesses that we do have to address.
And the third part of that question were the attributes that you bring to the job to both continue with those strengths and address the weaknesses.
Well, one of the things I can say unequivocally is I do as I do, I say what I say, and I lead from the front. I'll never ask someone to do something that I wouldn't do. I'll never ask them to do something I think is beneath myself. I've always been that way. I take pride in the fact that I still join officers on calls. I still enjoy handling calls for service and serving the town's residents. And I think that by showing that kind of example of leadership, that we're telling these officers that just because you rise up doesn't mean you stop. You keep doing the job. that you set out to do.
Thank you.
Mine, yeah. What have you done in the past 1 to 3 years to prepare yourself to be a chief of the North Andover Police Department?
The last 1 to 3 years, I've been learning a lot. I went from the criminal investigations division commander job function to the operations commander, uniform patrol. I went from handling detective calls and school safety calls to operations calls, uniform patrol. I learned an incredible amount. The past 1 to 3 years, we actually assisted with the budgeting for the department, which was kind of a new experience. I learned a lot about the other side of how things get done with the department, and working with the town manager's office, the assistant town manager, the accountant. We basically constructed a budget, and I watched how not only you build it, but then you expend it and make sure you have, used what you say you have put in for, and that you're not abusing any sort of, you're not abusing the privilege of asking for money from the town.
Bill?
Oh, so I jumped in before and asked the last question because he just teed it up so perfectly with that. But I mean, I guess I could. Do you want me to jump to the last one, which is, why do you want to be chief of the North Andover Police Department?
Well, I think Selectman Stewart will attest that when I was a reserve officer candidate in 1999, he did ask what I wanted to do, and I did say I'd like to be chief one day.
Don, what are you a priest? Do they go into like the confessional and tell you?
But answer that. On a serious note, I want to be chief here because I see this department as just going in the right direction, and I want to lead it. Again, I stated earlier, there's a lot of bad things going on in the country with how police officers are treated, some of them rightfully so. And it's a matter of let's make sure that we in North Andover have the best training, we're up to date, especially training on those high-risk, low-frequency events that can get us in trouble. And the more we train on those things, the more we seek out the causes that could get us in trouble and train for it, the better we're all going to be.
So, you're one of 3 people who want to be chief, and this board chose to keep that search internal. And what that means is that the next chief, whoever we select, is going to be the chief of a department where there are 2 people in it who also wanted to be in that role. If selected as the next chief, what, if anything, will you do to utilize the skills of the other 2 gentlemen seeking this position here tonight? And more importantly, what will you do to mend fences and build bridges with those who may have wanted to see one of those other 2 be in that position?
First, it not only extends to those 2 individuals who are, qualified as well, but it also extends to everyone as far as I'm concerned in the department. And it becomes a level playing field. And we're going to reach out to each and every person and see what you can bring to the table. Because I know there are my shortcomings that I have that I'm aware of, and I have to look towards someone else to kind of fill my shortcomings. And I know Lieutenant Forward Sergeant Crevier can assist with that, but there's also other members of the department, other sergeants and other patrol officers who can also help. So it's a level playing field as far as I'm concerned. We have a job to do. We can't be holding grudges.
Yeah, do we want to keep the order as we did last time? Okay.
Yeah. What would you say is a weakness of yours as a leader supervisor, and what would you do as chief to address that trait?
Say that again, please.
What would you say is a weakness of yours as a leader supervisor, and what would you do as chief to address that trait?
Delegating stuff, without a doubt. That's one of the things that I tend to not tell people to do things if I can do it myself. And one of the problems I have is I let the little things build up, and I say, I can take care of that, I can take care of that, and all of a sudden my plate's full. And I realize I could have dished some of that out. And one of the things that comes to mind, everyone remembers the trash truck that went in Lake Chickawick last year. So I got called to the scene, and the sergeant was there. It was a very capable sergeant, all right? He's one of the best ones I think we have. And he started asking me, okay, you're taking this over. And I said, you know what, no. I said, I'm going to be here as a resource, but you're going to do it. I want to watch you do it, and I want to see. And there was a couple things I did to, give him a little hint here and there, but for the most part, he handled it. And that's one of those things that I look at as chief, is you're building up the next potential chief. And I put something in the book that, if you remember, it's almost like the Bill Belichick next man up. Okay? Do your job. Okay, let's pretend that the chief isn't there or the lieutenant's not there. The sergeant's going to step in and fill the role. And if he has proper training, he can do it. It's also that experience. So as a chief, I would do something along those lines as fill the role, be there as a resource, but don't necessarily come in and take over. Let some other supervisors do their job and watch them, critique them. But that's how we're going to build this up. And that's one thing that I can feel good about, because now I'm delegating it and it's getting done properly. And I'm saying, wow, now I can do this more often. This is great. So.
Thank you. Am I the next one? Okay, I thought he had one more. Okay. The police department has been accredited for a number of years. Do you anticipate continuing with the accreditation? And if so, how do you view accreditation and what as being beneficial to the department? And how do you view accreditation as being beneficial to the town and the community? If you need me to read it again.
I may.
Because it's a lot.
I'm going to try to take a crack at it. First of all, accreditation, absolutely, 100%, I stand behind it. As I took part in the first accreditation with the sergeant that was in charge of it. We're getting reaccredited. We've been reaccredited once. We're going for a second time this coming year. It is a huge benefit because the policies that you have in place through the accreditation process are a liability inhibitor. Okay? It basically protects us. It tells us what we need to do, when we should be doing it. And furthermore, it's a benefit to the town, because you have an accredited police department, okay? Your insurance ratings aren't going to be as high because the department is doing things right. And again, I keep saying that, doing things right. We're making sure that everything is done by policy, by procedure, that's standardized throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So without a doubt, we're going to keep getting accreditation. We may even look to the next step, which is federal accreditation. I know our communication center needs to be certified. I'd like to see that be APCO certified, which is another feather in our hat, but it also makes sure that we're living up to standards and making sure that we're doing the right thing.
Thank you.
So this is a little bit different than the last time we sat down with the potential chief, and that you've had the chance to see your assessment scores.
Okay.
Are there any parts of that assessment that you wanted to speak about with this board, or any things that you feel didn't accurately reflect your strengths, or
Second question.
is that, I mean, it's,
That's not the second question, I don't think.
then I will, I mean,
Kathy's, I'm.
You're doing this in gray area.
I mean,
Okay,
it's
my apologies.
Okay.
it's about the accreditation, I mean, the
Yeah,
assessment, it's
sorry.
just straight, what you liked about the assessment or weaknesses.
So it's my assessment results and anything that I saw that I want to explain. I think we touched on this earlier with, some of my weaknesses are other officers' strengths. And I know in some areas, I think I did really well. In other areas, I thought I did well, and I didn't do as well as I thought, and I found that other people did better than me. So obviously, I look back and I say, well, whatever you did it right, and I did it wrong. So we need to talk, and you need to help me figure out how I can make sure I do it right.
Okay.
Again, level playing field. It's we got to talk, we got to communicate. That's just the way it works in this business. You have to.
Hey, Lieutenant Gray, I have another question that was brought to mind earlier tonight. You've had a chance to review the contract, and there's certain items in there that are requirements of you when you execute that, or when you join as chief. Are you willing and ready to execute that contract as written?
Not as written right now, and I've spoken to the town manager about it, and we have had some discussions about that, and we are in the process of looking at that. Mr. Manager, I think that we're on our way.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Lieutenant Gray. We're going to end your interview with a closing statement, please.
Thank you. I have, I put a lot of thought into this, the blueprint that I gave you, because I'm taking this seriously. I put it in writing and reduced it to writing because this is here to remind me, if I deviate from my plan, that someone can say to me, hey, that's not what you said when it mattered most. So everything's in writing that I feel is important. Plans, how I feel about officers, how I feel about a chief, how I feel that community policing should be done, the new drug crimes out there, the opioid epidemic, how I feel about we're going to handle those things. Everything's here because this is what I believe in. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to hear me speak. I hope you did read what I wrote down. I did put a lot of thought into it. And my wife put a lot of effort proofreading it, so. But thank you very much.
Thanks, Lieutenant Gray.
And thank you for your service to the community. sign.
Good evening.
Good evening. Our third candidate this evening is Lieutenant Folds. Thank you for being here. We are going to open with your opening statement.
Hello, Eric Folds. Most of you know me as EJ. I've been with the police department for 28 plus years, 16 years as a supervisor. Currently, I'm in charge of the criminal investigation division, and that division is, I've never worked in detectives, okay? It's been eye-opening over the past year, what they do. We assist patrol and investigations, major crimes, work with federal and state agencies. We deal with forensics, evidence collection, evidence control. Also in charge of the school safety unit. We currently have a school resource officer in the high school and also in the middle school. Middle school officer covers the elementary school. That's my current duties. I've been involved in most major incidents that have occurred in town, either as a supervisor or a line officer. I've used that experience dealing with major weather events, homicides, armed robberies, fatal crashes. Recently, I developed a tabletop planning exercise. We did that for training for supervisors, patrol officers, and communication officers to see what it was like to work as a team. So they're prepared before they head into these events. That's basically my opening statement.
Thank you very much. I will start the interview this evening with the first question. What are your expectations for the police department, and what do you hope to achieve as police chief in the short term, 1 to 2 years, as well as the longer range, 3 to 5 years?
I look to build on, we have a great department right now. I look to build on the success that Chief Gallagher has already established. I'd like to get a strategic plan in place. It'd be premature to come up with one now because our basic duty is to reduce crime, fear of crime, and improve the quality of life to the people that live, work, and visit North Andover. So my plan starting hopefully in July would be a community survey, gather information from the people we serve, see what their concerns are, see what their quality of life issues are, see what their fears are. I'd also do an internal survey, anonymous, with the members of the department to see what their concerns are, what their perceptions are. I take that information, invite community leaders, elected officials, people, stakeholders in the community, a group of about 15 to 20 people, do a SWOT analysis of the police department. A SWOT analysis is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Strengths and weaknesses, we look internally at the department. Opportunities and threats, we look externally. Plan out 5 years. A good strategic plan is a 5-year plan. Okay. Review that annually after we set goals. If we can achieve those goals, they have to be achievable, but not easy. Each year, we revamp the strategic plan, push it out another year.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Folds, thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for stepping forward.
Thank you
for this opportunity. My question is a 3-part question. Basically, it's the department today has many strengths. It also has areas for improvements. Can you talk about the areas of strengths and the areas needed of improvements and the attributes that you bring to the job to continue with those strengths and address the areas for improvements?
Certainly. Strengths. Our biggest strength is our people. We've got guys that have been on 30 years down to an officer that's graduating next week from the police academy. All quality people. They're dedicated to the job. They want to do the job. They serve the community well. We're well-liked in the community. I think that's our number one strength. Weaknesses, there's some divisiveness in the department. This entire process we've gone through here has caused some, not problems, but little division within the police department, and that was a concern. I think we can bridge that. I think that's something we have to do, no matter what happens tonight. We all have to work towards that, bring everyone back as a team. Teamwork is number one. You rely on the other guy for your life when you're on the street. So I think that's the number one thing we have to work on. That's the biggest weakness I see right now. I think I've shown in the past I can bring people together. I'm very collaborative when it comes to tackling problems. I've worked with most department heads, community leaders. I think I've worked with every one of you on a project or a program within the town or the police department over the years. And I'm pretty confident to say that the interactions have been positive.
Okay. Thank you.
I keep wanting to call him Porky. That's
It'd be an honor, Mr. Stewart.
that's his dad's name. What have you done in the past 1 to 3 years to prepare yourself to be chief of police in North Andover?
I personally have I've completed the FBI Leader program. It's a 3-part program. They call it the Trilogy. It's FBI recognizes it, and LEADER stands for Law Enforcement Executive Development Association. It's each level. It starts with a supervisory component. That's a week-long class. Next is a command component. That's basically mid-level supervisors. That's a 1-week program. And then they have the executive program. That's also a 1 week. That's for command staff and above. I've actually taken a few courses to become familiar with, again, when I changed to detectives, these guys have training. I've never worked as a detective. These guys have training I wasn't familiar with. I needed to lead them. I've actually taken a basic DEA narcotics course just to get an idea what they're doing. I've taken a fingerprint course. I've done some extensive emergency management courses in ICS. I've done ICS up to 400. So that's what I've done to prepare myself. As a leader of an organization, basically the top public safety official in the town, I believe that's exactly what you need.
Hi, Lieutenant Pauls. Thank you for coming. What would you say is
No.
is it me?
I think it's Phil.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As long as the question, I really, as long as the questions are the same. Again, Sergeant Currier just teed me up perfectly for the
I
wide
know.
question, but
Go ahead.
Lieutenant Folds, why do you want to be police chief?
Why do I want to be police chief? Basically, I think I'm the best person for the job. I see where the department has come from when I started back in 1987. We had some troubling years in between. I think we've moved forward. We turned a corner back in the 90s, 2000s, got back on track. I think Chief Gallagher was a great succession to Chief Stanley, and I'm looking to build on everything that Chief Gallagher has done. I think I could take where Chief Gallagher has the department now and effortlessly move it forward. And I think as chief, I'm out there. I love doing the volunteer work. I love getting out in the community. And I think as a chief, that's a great representation for the police department and the town.
So, as you acknowledged a little bit earlier, this promotional process was restricted to just internal candidates, with the 3 applicants this evening all being existing members of the department. That means the next chief is going to be someone who oversees 2 people who are also sought this job. What, if anything, would you do to utilize the skills of the other candidates, and more importantly, bridge the gaps, or excuse me, bridge the differences, amend the fences between differing factions?
Well, Lieutenant Gray, I've worked with him for a while as division commanders, and prior to that, as sergeants. Outstanding, dedicated. I mean, he is dedicated almost to a fault to this job. He lives, eats, breathes this job. Very focused on training. He currently works as our training officer. Risk management, he's a big guru on risk management. I think he's in the perfect position right now as Operations Division Commander. I think he needs to do a little bit more of the administrative end of it, which is tough. It's tough going from patrol sergeant to division commander, lieutenant, because the job changes. From patrolman to patrol supervisor, you're still on the road, you're still making car stops, that's all the fun stuff. When you transition from patrol supervisor sergeant to lieutenant, it becomes more of an administrative job, and it's tough to let that go. I went through it, Lieutenant Gray has gone through it. Sergeant Crevier, very, very intelligent. Technology is his thing. I'm not a tech guy. I'll be the first one to admit it. I count on people around me who are tech people to either show me or take care of it for me. I'm not ashamed to say that. I think Sergeant Crevier right now, he's a shift commander. I definitely see him moving up in the ranks. I provide more leadership training for Sergeant Crevier, since he hasn't had it to the level that Lieutenant Gray has. The FBI National Academy, I know, I believe Lieutenant Gray and myself have both put in our applications. I'd like to open that up to whoever the next lieutenant is. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity, and the experience you get at the National Academy is invaluable.
Thank you.
Now my turn. What would you say is a weakness of yours as a leader supervisor, and what would you do as chief to address that trait?
Weakness. I've actually done a SWOT analysis on myself, and I've identified some weaknesses. Some of mine are organization. I try and do too many things at once, and I know it, so I'm a big list person. I live by the list, but if things start snowballing and out of my list, I suffer because of that, and as chief, that would affect the department. I'm actively working on it. It's gotten better. The other is I'm fairly laid back when talking with people, even when issuing discipline. I told when I was the Operations Division Commander, being the bad guy kind of came with the job. Lieutenant Carney did it before me. And I had to issue discipline. And I'd bring guys in, we'd talk about it. They obviously don't like hearing it. And I told them, I says, I don't like doing it. It's part of my job. I have to be the bad guy. I'll try and be the nicest bad guy there is. Doesn't always work. So I think those are probably two of my biggest weaknesses. And like I said, I'm working on the organization thing. I've got a good handle on it. As far as being a bad guy or stern, I don't know what you want to say. I don't want to say bad guy. Forceful, I guess. At times I can be, but I don't think it's always consistent.
Thank you.
Lieutenant, the assessment score was sent, your assessment score was sent to you, and so this has given us an opportunity unlike in prior searches, to discuss this test to a certain degree. Are there things in that assessment that you... I'm trying to think of how exactly then I worded it. Are there scores that you would, not the actual score itself, but are there parts of the assessment that you want to elaborate on, or weaknesses or strengths that will help put it in context for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually talked to Alan Gould after we got our scores. I reached out to Mr. Gould from Municipal Resources Incorporated.
Is that our assessor?
Yes.
I went over my scores, and a couple areas, one of them was a budget problem. So we discussed that, and they gave us a scenario where there was a lot of sick time, people out injured, there was going to be a lot of overtime filled. And they wanted to see how we were going to fix it. I actually worked on the budget. They used our actual budget. I've worked on the budget. I looked at it. I explained, we look at several different things. I said, but we've dealt with this before. Over the past 28 years, I've dealt with these budget issues. You've all seen us go through budget issues. I said, and we get it done. They wanted specifics on doubling up cars, running short shifted. I don't think it's as concrete as saying I'd double up a two-man car. I'd short shift a midnight shift. I'd take 2 detectives and put them in uniform. I think the problem with that was seeing the entire situation. I don't role play well. Another one was typical with communities our size, police departments our size. They did state that we tend to think inside our box, have that North Andover mentality because we've been doing it and it's been working. A couple of them, they were looking for more contemporary ideas that I just didn't hit them with. In the first writing exercise, I was on a laptop. I never use a laptop, and I had a bunch of spelling mistakes. So, and that's, he said, spelling and punctuation.
We actually went and,
So
yeah, so
you're ready for the last one? Okay.
you jumped ahead of her. She-
Did I?
I jumped ahead of you, and then you paid me back.
Oh, no.
Yeah, there we go.
The police department has been accredited for a number of years. Do you anticipate continuing with accreditation? And if so, how do you view accreditation as being beneficial to the department? How do you view accreditation as being beneficial to the town and the community? And if you need me to read it again as you go through it, I'm more than happy to do that.
Absolutely fine. Accreditation, absolutely, we need to continue it. Right now, we're getting prepared for the reaccreditation process. That's happening in April. So we're reviewing all our policies, making sure they're up to date with current laws and procedures through the courts. It benefits the police department because it professionalizes us. Not that we weren't professional before, but these are standards that are approved by chiefs and higher-ups, and they're consistent with other police departments in the Commonwealth. I'm not sure the exact number of accredited departments there are now, but it's grown since, I think, 5 years ago, there was 35 or so. It has grown, okay? And that's great, because we're on the same page as if we respond to Andover for mutual aid, we're familiar with their policies. The same thing, I know Lawrence isn't, but I think Methuen starting to go through it, if they aren't already. It's a consistency that basically professionalizes the police department and holds them to certain standards. For the town, I think that's a huge selling point as far as people call us all the time asking about areas in town. Is it a safe area? North Andover is a safe area. It's pretty much what we tell them. But yeah, the police department's very professional. They're accredited. If people look at this community as a place they want to raise their families, I think that's beneficial to the town of North Andover. So that's how it benefits the police department and the town.
Thank you.
So Lieutenant Folds, I have the last question. So you've had a chance to review the contract, and in that contract there's some significant items that you're required to do as chief. It's important to me that the next chief is ready to move forward with that. Are you ready to sign that contract as written?
Absolutely. Actually, we did have some email back and forth. There are a couple things that we've agreed upon to talk about in the contract. Nothing earth-shattering, and fixes have been made, typos. Not in the contract was the resigning from civil service. I know that's like the biggest change for people. I have no qualms about resigning from civil service to take this position. I think it's actually in the town's best interest, and I think it's in the next chief's best interest to resign from civil service. It takes that safety net away. It's like a tightrope walker. There's acceptable risk in being a tightrope walker. There's acceptable risk with being a chief of police. All right, and you know that going in. But if you have that safety net underneath you, are you going to make more risky decisions knowing that you have a place to fall back on? Same thing with a tightrope walk. I think it benefits the chief and the town.
Thank you.
Okay. Lieutenant Folds, those are the end of the questions, and now we'll have a closing statement.
Okay. As you can see by my resume, I have the needed experience to lead the men and women of the police department. What it doesn't show in the police department, I don't want to say it's an all-boys club. We have several women in that, but there's a lot of joking around a little bit. And you need someone with the emotional and psychological maturity to lead, to be able to put things back in line, to basically make mature decisions. I believe I have that emotional and psychological maturity to put incidents behind me for the good of the department, to put personalities aside for the good of the department. Every decision I make, I think town and organization first. How will this reflect on the town of North Andover? How will this reflect on the organization, the North Andover Police Department, before I make that decision? And with that in mind, I think I'd be the best choice for Chief of Police.
Thank you, Lieutenant Folds. Thank you for your time as well as your service to our community.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're assuming there'd be some level of discussion, although certainly that's on the board, as is not an uncommon practice with us, of drafted a motion, not with names, but a motion relative to making a decision. Contained in that motion, not unlike there was within the fire chief motion which was adopted, it assumes that there'll be agreement reached on a contract. It was a question asked by Selectman Valancourt. And it also assumes that there will be a letter by whoever is selected by chief that they will relinquish civil service status. That was the direction provided by the board. It was agreed to with the fire chief candidate. That's happened. So the motion contains an assumption that there'd be a successful negotiation of the contract and relinquishing the civil service status.
Relinquishing, that was the town meeting vote back several years ago, my understanding.
No, relinquishing civil service status is an optional item of the board. The position is not a civil service position. The relinquishing of civil service status relates to what happens if a chief chooses to return or leave the position, what happens next. If they maintain civil service status, they could return to the department. Technically, there'd be a question about bumping back into a position. Would you take down someone who had moved up to a lieutenant, move them back down? In many departments, certainly not exclusive, it has been the practice here for both Chief Melnikas and Chief Gallagher. They relinquished civil service status. Obviously, it was the made in the motion for the fire chief as well, and deputy now chief. I'm not sure when I start calling him chief, but
March 21st.
March 21st, yeah.
7:15 p.m.
I think it's March 22nd, but future Chief McCarthy has agreed to it as well. Depending on your perspective, I think Lieutenant Foles may have expressed it better than I could, but in essence, what it does is indicate that there's a career change. It'd be difficult to imagine that a person sitting in the chief's role some number of years out returns into the department in a subordinate role. I think that becomes complicated. So whoever was here in the past, or whatever decision was made, it was certainly a decision that was the best thing to do for the town back at the time that Chief Gallagher and Chief Malnikas was appointed. I can't speak to the dates before then because he just wasn't here. But it doesn't relate to the fact that the position itself is not in civil service. It's not union, not civil service. This relates to what happens if a sitting chief no longer is serving as chief.
Okay.
Has that happened in other communities?
I'm sure somewhere it's happened. I don't have any experience of that happening, quite frankly. I'm sure it's happened.
Stanley was civil service.
Well, I mentioned more that they revert back.
It's a different, yeah. Is it possible?
There was a town meeting vote on civil service.
Right, no, the
But that's
position,
okay.
no, the position is exempt from civil service. That's different than retaining civil service status in the case that you choose to vacate the position. These chief positions are not civil service. That's why you're allowed sort of this, if you take this in the right way, a relatively unscripted process. Is that the positions are not civil service positions. The suggestion or the letter that is requested that the person relinquish civil service status relates to what happens if they vacate the position of chief. Are they allowed the right to return to the department in a civil service listed position, lieutenant, sergeant, patrol, as an example, and the rights they have in that particular case?
So my question was, are you aware of any other communities where a chief has chosen to do that or been forced to do
I know, but I'm sure it's happened.
Yes.
Yeah, I would absolutely tell you it's happened. And some departments require relinquishing civil service and some do not. It's the discretion of the appointing authority, and you're the appointing authority.
What does Andover do? Just out of curiosity, just because they're named.
They do not require, but I'm not sure if that's exclusive or it was the last time through. I can't speak to it, but they do not require it. At least I've been told. I haven't done any survey on it. I've been told that they don't require it, but this town has. So my other communities, they require that you relinquish civil service. But every town is different.
I would just like to say that every single person that came before us tonight mentioned community policing, and I think that's a really encouraging thing that all three of these gentlemen came up there and talked about how much they wanted to see the police department get even more involved with our community. And I don't think that's actually a surprise when you think of the successful events we do at National Night Out. I think they do a great job, and I'm glad to know that whoever's selected tonight is somebody who's going to continue that tradition and expand upon it, actually expand upon that tradition.
Madam Chairman, can I make a few comments? Legacy, you got written down, you want to go first? Or do you?
You can go.
Okay. A little bit of history on this. I first got on the board in 1991. At that time, the Board of Selectmen would sit and they would interview reserves, they would interview officers, and it took up an awful lot of our time. At that time, I sort of thrived on that because I thought I was doing the best for the community. I'm sitting here now, and it's not the same. There's three people here that I've known very well for years. Lieutenant Foles, he was here 3 years when I came on as a selectman. I knew his father very well. He put up with a lot of my unruly foster kids, which must have been a real pain in the butt, Dan Crevier, he interviewed him, put him on as a reserve, put him on as a permanent officer. In full disclosure, he played softball on my team for 5 years. Charles Gray, the same thing. He was put on the reserves and on as an officer. And you heard what they both said. Is they were both very aggressive in what they were doing is going forward. 4.5 years ago, we had an assessment. We had an assessment for Chief Gallagher and Charles Gray.
6 years.
6 years. Okay. Five. I was there. Okay.
Somewhere in between, 5. I think.
To be perfectly honest with you, the test was almost even. Matter of fact, Charles Gray was ahead by 1 point. But at that time, he was too young to do that job, I thought, and Chief Gallagher had to waiting for his turn to hop in. I think what I did at that time is I made a thought in my mind that if it ever comes up again, it would be Charles Gray's job to lose because of how he did in the test and everything else. I don't know whether you can reveal what the test scores were, but it's very substantial. So I don't have a motion right now. I'd like to hear what Dickie has to say.
Well, I don't know when we will be making motions, or will we be making motions tonight. There was a lot of information that was presented tonight. I guess my comments are going to be, the Chief of Police is a commander, a leader, and a unifier of the police department. He's also the face and the representative to the community. I think that those are very important traits that a person needs. I think given that, I am supporting Lieutenant Folds for this position. I feel he has the experience and the knowledge and the respect to do this job and to do it well. He has not only the respect of our own police department, but I know that he has the respect of the police departments around us. And respect is not something that's given very easily. It's something that's earned. So I think that is something to consider. I also, Lieutenant Folds came on, as Mr. Stewart said, in 1988. 1999, he was promoted to sergeant. He served in that capacity for 14 years. Recently, he was promoted in 2013 to one of the 2 lieutenant's positions. This past year, he has been the commander of the detectives. Before that, he was in charge of operations. Combined, he brings to the table a 28-year police experience in North Andover. I think he has outreach to the community that is unparalleled. He has been involved with the festival committee for years. He's taken the North Andover Christmas Parade to the next level, both organizing it, raising money for it. He's done a tremendous job with the community. He works tirelessly at the sheep shearing, the 4th of July, all the events on the Common. He's a real asset to the community. He works with the local businesses to the extent that in 2015, the North Andover Merchants Association named him the Volunteer of the Year. So incredible accomplishments there. So I just, again, am throwing my hat in the ring for Lieutenant Folds. I think he has the experience and the knowledge and the leadership characteristics, as well as the community the community involvement to make significant contributions to the police department, unify the police department, and bring it forward to the future. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me.
Did you want to go ahead?
We'll go in the circle. Where are you going next? All right. I came in tonight eager to learn, and I think that I learned a lot about all 3 of these candidates. In a very similar capacity to Chairman Watson and to Dick, I have had the opportunity through the North Andover Merchants Association to work with Lieutenant Folds. But as far as police career, I've never had the opportunity to hear about the North Andover Police Department the same way that I got to hear it tonight from all 3 of the candidates. Like I said, the focus on community policing, I think that those are values that stand out to me. I was given a lot of information tonight, and I came here really wanting to seek out not just information about the department, but specifically about what to me was going to have to be a position of not just leading a department, but unifying a department. Because to me, just having conversations in the community, having conversations amongst ourselves, it seems like there were strong feelings one way or another about who should be chief or who should continue with what. And I really was eager to hear the responses that they gave to this question, the question about what would you do and how would you handle the other 2 individuals applying for this position. And for me, I want to say that what moved me was their responses about the responses to that question. I certainly was moved. I'm glad that all of them see that the importance of moving beyond any type of competition that's coming from this. I appreciate the feedback, the feedback Lieutenant Gray gave about everybody being on a level playing field. I appreciate the feedback Lieutenant Folds gave. I don't even think it was as a response to that question, but just the detail he went into about the strengths of the two individuals that are also seeking this role. Just looking at my notes, the one thing that stood out to me actually was what Sergeant Crevier said, and it's, I mean, again, I know some of these men more than others, but it was his comment about actually Lieutenant Folds that I think makes me also want to see him be our next police chief, and it was the comment that Lieutenant Folds was a mentor to him. And I don't even know if he meant to say it that way. It wasn't a response to my question, but it was that EJ was a mentor to him, and that's really what I want in our next police chief, regardless of whether or not it's somebody that they always agree with. I actually think that speaks very highly of Sergeant Crevier, though, as well. I mean, if we had to vote, if I had to vote right now and there was a motion on the floor, I would vote for Lieutenant Folds, but I think it's clear we have 3 really talented individuals in this police department, amongst many actually talented individuals.
So, briefly, we take the assessment test, and Charles Gray came out 3 touchdowns ahead. So what do you do with that information?
We now release it to the public.
But I would have, in support of that.
It's 3 touchdowns. So I would move to appoint Charles Gray as the next police chief.
I'll second that motion, but I'd like to speak to all of the candidates. First and foremost, I would, as I did with the fire chief, I submitted both names because I think they're all eligible. I think they're all very good. I was actually really impressed with this interview. I really was really impressed. It makes it an unbelievably difficult decision. This is probably one of the most difficult decisions that I've ever had to make on this board. But it comes down to, for me, they're all so very good. But we do have an individual that, as Mr. Stewart said, did score the highest on the assessment. He's been the lieutenant the longest. He actually scored very well the last time he took the police chief's test. His background is, his training and background is phenomenal. He's constantly learning. He does have his master's degree. But it is really, really hard. They're all very nice men. They're good men, and this is a really difficult decision. So that's when I rely on the way to be as fair as we can be. And I think the way that to be as fair as we can be is to rely on the assessment scores, to rely on who's been in a command position longer in the lieutenant's position, who has a master's degree. Those are things that are not biased to this board. They're facts. Who has received so many awards as Officer of the Year, training, unbelievable training, and I think that's a way for us to make the decision that's less subjective. I think that we have actual facts, numbers, and statistics to work with. So again, I do second that motion, but still up to discussion.
And did you just say that because of that comment, now these assessments must be made in public?
I think there's a fair amount of discussion that raises some questions about what we would do, but I'll let you know what ultimately I think.
I mean, because I
So
feel that is a very unfair characterization of the individuals to suggest that one came out 3 touchdowns ahead when you look at the. No, I mean, frankly, if we're at that point anyways, I mean, it's an assessment that, I mean, mathematically, I mean, we're talking about a percentage point and a half. So I feel like that's a really unfair assessment to all the candidates to suggest one individual completely walloped the other two.
Want me to make a motion? Okay.
But that's part of the discussion. Madam Chair, may I ask, could I take a further motion that in lieu of having to vote against any one individual, I also believe that all three of these are very solid men right here, and I would ask, I don't know what rules, I know we've discussed the rules that govern in general this board and how we vote. Is there an option before this board that we can vote in favor of anybody as opposed to ever voting against somebody?
That's exactly.
That's what we're doing.
That's what we're.
Well, a motion was just made.
And I seconded it.
And she
For-
seconded.
Yes.
Okay, so,
For an
favor
individual.
of.
Requires an affirmative or a negative vote. You're
Right.
asking if there can be.
You made a motion for Lieutenant Gray.
No.
And
Don made a
Dawn did, I
you
seconded.
seconded him for Lieutenant Gray.
but I
so
will,
then-
but I will make a more formal motion, that way you're not voting, you wouldn't be voting against somebody, you would be voting
think-
for
Well, the
somebody.
motion-
I think it's very important.
But no, I mean the one for the record.
Okay, hold up.
Or Dawn can do it.
Hold up. I think it's very important that we all recognize that we had three outstanding individuals before us this evening. All three who have dedicated years and years of service to this community. I think it's also very important that the five of us at this table realize that we are not here to vote against our friends or for this one, or that's not what this is about. And I think it's really important that we focus on not so much the semantics, but on doing the right thing by our community and by the department, regardless of what each of us feel individually, what each of us feel individually is most important. I understand what you're trying to say, but I don't know if this is all about feelings. It doesn't, hurting feelings, not hurting feelings. The three gentlemen that came before us tonight are three of the finest gentlemen that I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. All three are dedicated officers to that department, to their fellow officers, and to this community. Regardless of what happens tonight, I personally have absolutely no doubt that all of them will show up tomorrow and do exactly the same outstanding job that they have done for years and years and years. I think it's incumbent upon us, as the leaders of this community, to just do what we feel is right and not get all bogged down in exact semantics as to who we're voting against or who we're voting for. That's not what it's about. It's about filling the most important public safety role in our community. And that's all I'm saying. Continue on, but that's just my take on what's beginning to happen.
If I can respond to that, there's no doubt that the three gentlemen that were here tonight are.
No, and I didn't mean to imply, I'm sorry if
Yeah,
I didn't mean to imply.
no, I know
anything.
that, but I'm just agreeing with you on that. What I take a little bit of exception with is the fact that, you're saying we're voting our feelings. Yeah, let me finish. The feelings do come into play because this is the culmination of a process that's been going. I mean, this wasn't the first time that I've discussed these individuals and had thoughts about them. So this isn't
Right.
this isn't just tonight.
Right, I may have not
So
expressed
this is
exactly what I
something that,
mean.
yes, feelings come into it, but feelings of who I feel should be filling this role and who I think can best fill the role
Right.
and best do the job.
I
Those
was
are my
referring to
feelings.
Phil, though, in regards to feelings of the exact semantics of voting for or against. I don't think we should feel that we're voting for or against. I'm not articulating it the way that I want to. But it's...
The motion for one person doesn't construe that the other people are not qualified.
Thank you. Thank you.
But my request, I'm
Chairman,
saying,
Diana Tracy.
it's
Yeah,
just-
thank you.
The vote would result in the same thing. It was simply a point of information
Right.
as to how we as a board can vote. If it has to be a motion in the name of an individual,
Right.
vote yes or no. Because frankly, I agree. I think that every single person
Yeah.
that came before us this evening, all three would make a good chief. And I would never want that a vote for no against somebody, a vote for no
Right.
against the motion to be construed as me not believing that that individual was incapable of doing the job.
Right.
And so that is,
Right, I get it.
the expectation that feelings could somehow not play a role in this is, feelings have to play a role because while we sit around this table, I appreciate the size of this audience. Normally, it's just the five of us and three very committed public servants right here. But
And Stan.
And Stan.
Usually Stan.
Stan is MIA right
left
now.
tonight.
But I mean, I think that that it's helpful because I think that whoever leaves this meeting as the next chief should not leave with the impression that he does not have the backing of the community, or that the community does not have faith in that individual, regardless of who the individual is, to do the job.
Agree.
We just want to make sure that, I'm not intending that motions are specific. We talked a little bit about contract today, we talked a little bit about civil service. In order for me to have direction, whatever decision you make, we should be formal about the motion. It's not that we don't, sometimes we're a little less than formal. In these kinds of matters, it's important that we're formal about that.
Donnie, do you want to read the formal motion? So on your behalf of your first motion, move that the Board of Selectmen appoint Lieutenant Charles Gray as police chief effective July 1st, 2016, subject to the receipt of a letter relinquishing his civil service status and execution of employment agreement negotiated with the town manager.
So that's Donnie's motion.
Well, Donnie made the motion, and I seconded, but he didn't have the sheet. So on his behalf, as a friendly amendment, I made that, so I will, now I will second that again.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No.
Abstain? Did you?
I said
didn't-
no.
Oh, okay, I didn't hear. Do I, as has been practiced in the past,
I would respectfully ask that you don't. And then vote stands as voted. And my congratulations to Lieutenant Gray.
I don't know what to do.
That just requires a motion. If any member decides to make a motion to the effect that I think you're implying, that's the option of the members to make a motion. There's no motion. Any member can choose to make that motion. It's up to the board if they want to entertain the motion.
I'm not sure what you're trying to say.
A unanimous motion.
Oh, okay, all right, that's fine. That's, well, it's their prerogative.
Mhm.
So you want us to revote now? I'm confused.
As
Tracy, because you're mumbling.
as has been done in the past, we have, the chair has asked for another motion to show a unanimous decision for support, as has been done in the past. So I was putting it out there as to if there was going to be an additional motion made.
I think it goes back to, I want any police chief to be leaving here this evening. I guess this goes back to your maligning of feelings, but I think every police chief should be willing to, or be able to lead a department, a unified department. And so, yes, I'm comfortable making that motion.
Thank you.
To, I mean, is it verbatim as we've previously done?
Mm.
No, just
Just as a unanimous consent.
I motion to ask the board, how would I word this?
For unanimous consent.
For unanimous consent, and congratulations to our new police chief-elect.
Got me.
Appointed.
Charles Gray.
I'll second that.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No. Lieutenant Gray, with all due respect, I'll throw my full support behind you, but I won't change my vote. So and congratulations, and as I said, I'll throw my full support behind you.
Thank you.
And I know you'll do a great job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'd like to make one more motion. I'd like to make a motion, because of what was discussed this evening, that all the scores from the assessment center be released to the public as a matter of record.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It's unanimous.
For clarification, that's police and fire?
Yes,
Yes.
I will amend that
I'll assume that that's what you're back.
Otherwise, with no further business, Madam Chair, motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Aye.
Next meeting, both of us, different meetings.